So you have the legal sheet of paper with the big circle in the middle. That's where we're going to start. We're going to move on to the other legal sheet in just a little bit. Did everybody get a copy of this? It's upside down if the triangle's at the bottom. So you want the triangle in the top right corner. At least that's how I look at it. So we are going to start with that triangle in the top right corner. And you will need something to write with probably. All right. That triangle up at the top right represents the balanced assessment system. The balanced assessment system, state speak, came out with Senate Bill 163, 191, 212. It came out with all these laws. And what the laws said was that in our balanced assessment system, we will have a summative measure. That's the very tip of that triangle, is our summative measure. The summative measure, according to the state, is what? TCAP, PARCC, CMAS. So that summative measure includes one of those tests, or all of those tests, as the case may be. And when we talk about the balanced assessment system, that is the summative assessment piece that we have in place. Underneath that, we have our interim measures. The state law says we will have interim measures in place. Many of you are using MAP or STAR, iRead. You might be using DRA2, iReady. And there's others. You may be using the district interims. Those things count for the interim measure that we have to have in place. So Site 6, at the most basic level, by law, requires the state summative assessment, and it requires an interim measure. That's what it requires. The bottom segment of that triangle are the formative practices. It says we will have formative practices in place, those things that inform our day-to-day teaching and learning. And you will do that with kids, but it doesn't tell us what those will look like. The balanced assessment system, this triangle, we like to think about it as what's being done to us. It's what the state requires. So not the choices we make. These are outside influences. On the left-hand side of that page, you have the lines. And those lines represent the balanced assessment approach. Because in Douglas County, we don't have enough acronyms. We have the BAS and the BA. This is the BA, the Balanced Assessment Approach. The Balanced Assessment Approach is what we choose to do with our kids. It's the choices we make based on the children we have in our classroom and the content we're teaching, or our goals for those kiddos. This is stage 2 of your backward plan. It is Site 2. We still have summative practices. That's that tall line at the end. The summative practice could be a performance assessment. It could be an end-of-unit test. It could be any summative measure. What did the students learn throughout this unit? In the middle, we have a couple of shorter lines, not the shortest, but the shorter ones. And those are the interim measures that we have in place in our units. Those are the decisions we make to check where our kids are toward that learning outcome at the end, toward that summative assessment. So in the interim, our head is down, we are plugging away, the kids are plugging away, we are moving and grooving, and every so often we have to look up, lift our head up, and see where we are. How close to that target are we? And some kids may be right there, some kids may be further back. We then have to make decisions that take us out of that and differentiate our learning based on the kids' needs. We may have to slow down, we may be ready to speed up. It just depends. The shortest lines on there are all of our formative practices. So those are the thumbs up, the exit tickets. They may be informal, they may be more formal. But that's our balanced assessment approach, the decisions that we make. And when we talk balanced assessment approach, we are talking about all of our kids all of the time. This is everybody that we are in contact with. This is those kiddos and all of their learning, which becomes important. If you go back to that triangle, that's really Site 6. And we'll talk about how these integrate and overlap in just a minute. The big circle in the middle. We are going to break this down the middle. This is our site evaluation. As a whole, it represents Site 1 through 6. When we break it down the middle, on the left-hand side, is Site 1 through 5, and that's teacher practice. We've been living with Site 1 through 5 for quite a few years now. 2 years. In Site 1 through 5, we've got Site 1. What are our outcomes? We have Site 2. How do we measure those outcomes? In the assessment office, we're concerned about Site 2. Site 3, instruction. Site 4, we've got our teaching, or our culture and climate. And then Site 5 is professionalism. So that side of the pie we're familiar with. 1, outcomes, 2, measures, 3, instruction, 4, culture and climate, 5, professionalism. Site 2, again, is all of our kids all of the time. That's our balanced assessment approach. That goes up with the lines on the top left and that drawing at the top left. All of our kids all of the time. The right-hand side of this pie is about student performance. So we had teacher practice on the left 50%. The right 50% is all about student performance. And that is Site 6. State law, and this is for everybody in the state, says that 50% of our educator effectiveness rating will be based off of our teacher practice. 50% of our educator effectiveness rating will be based off of student performance. So that's why the pie is divided the way it is. On the right-hand side of the pie in Site 6, we have, again, something that state says we'll do. It's divided into 2 pieces, and those 2 pieces are individual attribution, what I do with my kids, and that's 40% of that entire pie. What I do with my kids. Then there is a collective attribution, which is 10% of the pie. That is, we are a school building, and as a building, we're responsible for all the kiddos that walk through our doors. So the collective is all of our kids.
That was 10%?
10% of the entire pie. Now, the choice to make it 40% individual, 10% collective that was left up to districts. So if you go to Littleton, they may have a different configuration. Harrison may have a different configuration. You can go around the state and you may see it flip-flopped. It may be 10% individual and 40% collective in other districts. That was a district choice. With that, the task force, there was a Site 6 task force that was put together in 2012-13, 2013-14. They worked with Dr. Sina Morgan, and it represented teachers from all grade levels, from all roles were represented. Administrators were on there, and this was the recommendation that came out of the task force, that we wanted to have more based on what we do with our kids. We wanted that student performance to be based on that. In Site 6, there's also 2 other options that came out of the task force. We recommend the most basic. So when schools are setting the model, The 40-10 is what we're going to recommend this year. The one I'm going to tell you right now we really don't recommend, but I'm going to put it out there. It is breaking down the 40% into 35% and 5%. 35, all my kids. 5% is a targeted group of kids. And that targeted group could be boys in writing. It could be inquiry in science. It could be my ELL kids. It could be just a special group that needs focus on one world-class outcome. It's the action research piece. We don't recommend this year because we're not sure the technology allows us to capture this, quite honestly. If you're going to fight for it and say, we want to do this, then you may have to let go at the end of the year when it comes out that the technology can't capture this yet. Okay, so just be aware of that. The collective can also be divided into two pieces. And the collective can be divided into 5% maybe grade level and 5% entire school. So if you have a common assessment that you give at second grade, you might choose to do grade level. Or you may choose to leave that as part of the individual. It's real easy to absorb that assessment into an individual one. So those were the recommendations made by the task force, is to have those 4 categories, to have the 40-10, and let it go that way. When we talk Site 2, all of our kids all of the time, that's everything we do. We do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of assessment practices throughout the year. When we talk Site 6, we are talking like 4 of those. So don't let Site 6 run rampant here. It is not the focus of your year. It is just a few select measures that reflect the best things that you do, the most meaningful things that you do with your kids in your class. It is not all of your practices. It is not even all of our kids. Site 6, there'll be a decision rule made, and we don't know what this rule will be yet. But it could be 80% of our kids meet this target if they're in my class 80% of the time. So the other day we had some schools that were a higher transient population for Douglas County, and they were saying, well, what about those kids that come in April? Do we have to count them? No. They haven't been in your classroom for the majority of the school year. Okay, so Site 6 is a sampling of our kids. It's a body of evidence. It's the best, most meaningful representations of what you do and what your kids do throughout the year. I'd like you to take a minute with that handout. There's a lot of information. And just with the shoulder partner, share what was your biggest aha, what was the best reminder, what was new, what do you think might be most valuable to take back? Have that conversation about 3 minutes.
I know you're still processing, but we have a short time with you today, so we're going to move you forward. We're going to ask you to turn again so you can see the screen, and this time you're going to get out the other legal piece of paper. First thing you're going to do is you're going to fold it in half like a hot dog. Fold it in half like a hot dog. So you've got to fold it in half. We're going to start on the side that says Site 6. So remember, we're developing our perspective. How are you, honey? How are you? I'm good. We're developing our perspective around Site 6 and Site 2. We're doing big picture. We don't want to get too close to those dots for pointillism. How many of you know the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie? Yeah, if you give a mouse a cookie, he's probably going to want a glass of milk. He's probably going to want a mirror to look at his milk mustache. It's all about cause and effect. Site 6 is all about cause and effect, and we're going to go backwards. We're going to start with the end, Step 3, the part that we've said we love Step 3 because it's about children and learning. So the end of the year, one of the things you have to do is you have to report growth. At the end of the year, every teacher will have to report growth. So that's the end of the year. We don't know if it's May or April. That's in the decision-making rules that have not happened yet. But you're going to report student growth. Special ed teachers, elective teachers, everybody reports growth on their kids. If I'm going to report growth, if you give a mouse a cookie, if I'm going to report growth, then I've got to move now to earlier in the year, and I need to have some baseline data. If I'm going to collect growth, I've got to know where they started. So you've got to have baseline data when you're in that step 3 process. We have baseline data, my elementary friends. We have it with the READ Act. We've been doing baseline data for years with Colorado Basic Literacy Act. We are all about where are these kids. This is where the elementary people breathe the best because we've been doing it. Collect baseline data to report growth of what? So you need, above that, you need what's called a student learning objective. What am I gathering growth on? So you have to have a student learning objective. Then you collect the baseline data. Step C will be new to us. In step C, you are going to set learning targets. Setting learning targets is not new. People have written books about how you set learning targets. So it's not a new practice. In fact, Marzano, years ago, wrote about how you can get a 33% gain when you are setting learning targets and the kids know where their target is and the teacher knows where their target is. 33% gain, so it's not new. In fact, this is where Austin, in his work with Rhode Island? New Hampshire. God dang it, I can't get the state yet. In New Hampshire, this is one of the things they've already done, is the learning targets. So what does it mean to set learning targets? You say, I look at my data, I got kids down here. They're not at grade level. This is where my special ed friends were going, woohoo! This is where our high transient at-risk kids, we go, yay, because we look at them here and we say, the kids who are here, 2 years below, whatever, they're going to grow to here. You set the target for kids who are below grade level. And then you set the target for kids who are here. And you say, if my kids are here on the baseline data in a year or in a unit, I expect them to be here. And if my kids are up here, and frankly, this is going to be the hardest one for this district, my kids are here, they're already above grade level, but they need to grow too. So where do I expect them to go? So all children grow. So you set the targets. Then you teach and progress monitor. Who's moving? Who's not moving? Who moved a lot? Who surprised me? Who went on vacation? Who shouldn't have gone on vacation? This is when you are progress monitoring the growth of children. That's what you're doing during the year. So you can see how step 3 is about children, and we are excited about it because it's about all kids growing. Now, if you go back to step 1, we did this last year. Step 1 is divide your pie. I think we divided the pie till the cows came home last year. We divided into the 4 different sections. You heard Chris say we suggest 40-10, and we will talk to the principals more about that in depth when we do that last session with you guys. So you divide your pie. That's step 1. You divide it. Step 2, you say which measures go in my pie, which are required by law, where am I going to put them? Which are optional, where am I going to put them? When we get to the inquiry piece, you are going to have cards that we've made for each grade where we've gone through and we've said, if you're a special ed teacher, here's what required. If you're an art teacher, here's what we've required. If you're a first grade teacher, here's what's required. And we put it in red. And then you'll see green that's blank, and those are optional. Here's where you have the conversation and you say, what assessments? Which assessments, which measures are about what we are as a building? And those are the ones you put in. I value this work that Douglas County is doing because it is honoring choice, and that Meadowview, who has Artful Learning, could choose to put a task in there that honors who Meadowview is. If I want to have a very Rick Kindle and your technology-based and your science and your inquiry, you may have an assessment in there that really honors who you are. This is about choice. And we have a line in our office that we use often, and it goes like this: with choice comes challenges. So you're going to grapple with it and decide which measures you put in where. You won't leave with those decisions today, but you will feel more comfortable with the cause and effect of those decisions today. Now I want you to open it all up. Let's look at the relationship between Site 2 and Site 6. Remember the circle. Site 2 is big. Site 6 is small. What we want, what Jim Calhoun calls the sweet spot, we want to have our good Site 2 be part and inform our Site 6. We don't want you to stop and say, all learning will stop now, and then we're just going to step aside and do Site 6. So at the beginning of the year, in the fall, this year it could be a little later because we're doing a slow rollout. But I'm going to look at maybe my interim or my summative. I'm going to look at a task that maybe I have up here in Site 2, and I'm going to use it for baseline data. So if I'm progress monitoring writing, I might have a task that I do early in the year that I have kids writing, and I can use that data to set my targets. We don't want you to think it's something separate. We want you to think about the crossover. So I can use this for baseline data. And maybe I'm working on writing. I have my data. Now I get into my second unit. And by the way, we are not saying everybody has 4 units. This is just an example. Please don't think Jamie went out and said you do 4 units, because I didn't. So now I'm in my next unit, and I'm working on writing within that unit. And I might be progress monitoring a few of the writing skills. I don't have to eat the whole elephant all at once. I might be working on clarity or structure. I might be working on a couple of the skills, but I'm progress monitoring within my unit. And then I get to my next unit, and again, I'm progress monitoring who's moving, who's not moving, and I may change my focus in writing or reading or math, whatever you're progress monitoring. Now I get to the end of the year. I need a way, I need a measure or a task that I can gather that end of the year growth data. So I might have a task that we do in 5th grade where my kids do writing, and I can use it to get my end of the year data and use for growth targets. And again, the rules have not been made for our district for when those have to be reported. When you hear, let's plug in, go to here. When you hear the music, you're going to stand behind your chair. You'll need your player card again. When you hear the music, you're going to stand behind your chair. You need the player card in your hand.